Welcome to Season 2 of the Psych Sessions Network podcast Teaching Matters, co-hosted by Rob McIntarfer of Lincoln Public Schools and Eric Landrum of Boise State University. These 10 episodes in our second season were recorded from the beginning of May through the beginning of September 2021. And as you will hear, we wander and meander quite a bit. However, there are themes for us that emerge, such as the roles that AP psychology and IB psychology play in U.S. high schools, the continuing challenges of assessment, and how scaling innovative pedagogies makes utilizing those principles all the more difficult. To take a deeper dive into understanding the IB psychology world, we invited Casey Swanson, a Michigan-based educator, to join us as our first guest on Teaching Matters. We broke away from our typical conversations in other ways, too. For one episode, we chatted about Albert Bandura, and Eric shared some stories from his own personal interactions. One episode in Season 2 had to be marked explicit. And if I repeated that word here in the introduction, then I would end up having to mark all of these episodes explicit. We end Season 2 stumbling on what perhaps could become a subtitle for our Teaching Matters series here. See what you think. Teaching Matters. Oh, Rob, but Eric? I am not going to give you any more context than that, my friends. You'll just have to listen. Please enjoy listening to Season 2 of Teaching Matters. Oh, Rob, but Eric.
Graduate student who was doing an internship in our department, and it was around the same time when the our Nebraska State Department of Education was developing a new statewide summative achievement test in reading and math.
Okay.
They were moving from a much more traditional format to taking advantage of item formats that you can do online that you can't do on paper, dragging things from place to place, some marginal fill in the blank, some diagram, like moving pieces of a diagram into place to answer a question, things like that.
Okay.
Dynamic assessment items that you're using technology to answer. It was all the rage at the time and probably still is. Oh, this would have been about 4 years ago. It's probably advanced well beyond that at this point. But any online assessment that K-12 students do now probably has some items like that. It's probably not strictly the traditional multiple choice. There's probably, sometimes it's a highlight. Those are called hot text items. Highlight the sentence in the paragraph that best expresses the main idea, that sort of thing. We were talking with her. She was looking for a research topic at the time, and we were talking with her about how, as far as we know in the literature, there's some stuff out there on what you can use multiple choice items to measure well, what you can use essays to measure well, what you can use short answer essays to measure well. Some of that stuff is out there. We asked her to do a mini literature review on, well, what kinds of thinking does a hot text item best measure and measure better than an essay or a multiple choice item?
Yeah.
Basically, is there someone who has matched up all these item types with what they measure well? Because we hoped that had been done and that evidence was being used by test developers to make this match.
Sorry. I should stop smirking.
And you're already jumping to the end of the story.
Sorry.
Apparently, there is nothing. At least at the time, there was very little. And it was really pretty damn arbitrary how they were choosing item types to measure different kinds of thinking. And she didn't want to do that as a dissertation topic, so she didn't do it. But I wish somebody would.
Oh, Rob.
That was our Laura Petrie moment.
Thank you. I didn't know if you were ever a Dick Van Dyke fan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Funny.
Rob. Oh, it is a credit to you that you would think that an academic or a publishing house, psychometric publishing house, would have done the due diligence to think that one would match up. One would be that thoughtful to think that we would match the item type to the goal of the outcome.
Yeah.
If anything, you might do it ex post facto. You might, after the fact, you would be doing a validity study or a validity check
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
going, all right, we selected fill in the blank to look at one critical thinking aspect of reading comprehension in third graders. Is this really valid? Did we really measure reading comprehension? Let's compare it against some standard measure that we've been doing for 50 years.
Right.
This new measure. And we don't really know if it's the fill in the blank, but we can at least know if the measure is valid compared to established norms.
Right. And I wasn't impossibly naive about it. I suspected that a lot of it was arbitrary, but I was wondering, it's big business. There's a lot of money involved.
Yes.
So these testing companies are spending a lot of money developing these tests because people pay a lot of money for them. So I was just wondering how they were. I didn't suspect that their choices were based on rigorous research, but I want to know what their choices were based on. And the arbitrariness did startle me a bit.
Well, and so if you're going to come up with some new bell and whistle, and what's it called? The highlighter? What was it?
There's hot text where you're highlighting a certain part of a text and in order to answer a question.
So, and I don't know anything about that. So I'm going to use these terms and probably sound foolish, but maybe the hot text benefit could be that it's faster or
Could be
more understandable, or maybe there's some universal learning design benefits, or maybe if it doesn't demand so much text instructions, maybe there's less disadvantage for English speakers. I mean, there could be some hidden advantages that a company wasn't coming out and saying, or they were too lazy to explain.
Could be.
Or they tried to be proprietary.
Yeah, you could reduce the reading load. You and I remember, I think I remember on the GRE, there was they would show you a passage, then they'd have a series of multiple choice questions where all of the answers would be quotes from the passage and you would have to choose the right quote from. So you had to do a lot of looking up at the passage and looking down at the item. Yeah. So that definitely could be superior. Yeah, it might be superior. I just want them to do the thinking or the research in order to figure out that it is.
And even if the validity is equivalent, that might be okay because there might be some other advantages. Maybe if the hot text, hot text. If the
we could go off on hot boxing for a while, but hot text.
If the hot text is only equivalent validity wise, but they've got some data that shows that minoritized individuals understand the instructions better.
Yeah.
Or if they understand that first gen students are less confused when they get to that task, if it's equivalent validity, but there's other benefits, then maybe it's awesome. Yeah. As long as it's equivalent validity, you're not harming the usefulness of the outcome scores, outcome measures.
Yeah. Might be great. What I contend isn't great is practically what ends up happening sometimes, and this happened in Nebraska. They'll hire Nebraska teachers to write some of the items, which is great. We absolutely need our teachers to be involved in item development. Absolutely.
Sure.
The table of specifications that gets produced, it used to be when we were all multiple choice all the time, you're going to write this many multiple choice questions on this objective, this many on this objective, But now with the new item formats, you'll write this many multiple choice questions on this objective and 2 hot text items and 2 drag and drop items. So there's no thought about a match between the type of thinking you're trying to measure and the item format. You're just fulfilling quotas because that's what the product can do.
Yeah, I would imagine there's a little bit more savvy in writing these newer type items. And I wonder if the teachers are getting any training in these newer type item writing.
Yeah, that, and maybe I would think I want there to be a reason why I choose so as an instructor and as instructors, you and I choose item formats for reasons. We know what kind of thinking we're trying to measure. And we choose the item formats that will best let students show what they know and are able to do about that thing.
Oh, Rob, that's going to be part of this title. Or we choose the item formats because those are the item formats that were available in the publisher's free instructor's manual.
Sure. And other practical considerations, you've got a hell of a lot more students than I do. So I can just have my students write all the time because I only have 4 of them. You can't do that. So there's pragmatic concerns too.
But I love that you live in the ideal ivory tower.
Oh, dang.
Where
the college guy calls the high school guy ivory tower. Damn.
But you're thinking about, I pick my test items. I'm going to do the Marlon Brando. I pick my test items.
Oh, that's funny.
Based on the format that matches the learning outcomes and the styles that I want demonstrated by my students. And I'm going, all right, let me look at these pages in this book. All right. Oh, these are some good test item files. That guy was on his A game that day. But by the way, I want to be able to say that because I had been that guy in the past where I wrote test item files for Leahy. I wrote them for Santrock.
Okay.
I've written them for a bunch of intro psych textbook authors back in the day. And that is such hard work.
Yeah, it's super hard work.
2,500 multiple choice test items after a revision of a textbook is done. And oh, by the way, do it in 4 weeks. So because the author spent 18 months revising, you have 8 weeks because you got to wait till the book is being revised. Now you've got all the proof pages. So now you can update and write new items and then get it done really quickly so everything comes out together.
Yeah, and that's one of the untold stories about textbooks that people just have to figure out later, that often it's not usually never, it's not the author of the textbook doesn't write their own item.
Oh, I've seen a couple people who do.
A couple?
Yeah, I mean, there are some textbook authors who want that quality control, and for some reason, they don't see their family for a few years. They go off into the basement and write like the Dickens, and good for them to be able to do it.
Yeah, I've gotten to do some of that work for Dr. Myers and then for Blair Broker and Ernst too. And it's a hell of a lot of work and your eyes cross after a while, but you get really good at writing items.
Well, there's only so many items and formats that you can write about an item about punishment for the learning chapter.
Right.
Trust me, there's only conceptual, factual, applied. Okay, write 10 items for each. I challenge anybody listening to this to write 30 multiple choice test items on punishment and make them be different.
Yes.
After about 6, you'll figure it out.
Yep. And make them all high quality. But pushing back on you.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Pushing back on you slightly, maybe. So now as an instructor, based on past conversations, I know that you often align your assessment format with your objective.
Yeah. Yes.
So your work on transferable skills, students making a presentation or communicating something, you are not going to make up 10 dopey multiple choice items and call it good.
That's very sweet of you. I don't give multiple choice tests.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you do that for a reason.
Yeah. I stopped that, I don't know, maybe about 12 years ago. Now they don't serve, and that's not to say that I don't use them occasionally for quiz items or readiness assessments. First 5 minutes in class, all right, I'm going to give you a 5-item quiz that might be multiple choice on Poll Everywhere. But for major understanding of course concepts or demonstration of skills, I'm not going to use multiple choice or fill in the blank or true false. I might use that kind of thing for fun in class as just a kind of a low key type of thing. But for major assessments, I mean, for me, Rob, and people will disagree with this or want to argue about it, a multiple choice test over content knowledge tells us what that student knows that moment they complete the item. And that's without any other information. That's all it tells us. That's what an achievement test tells us. It's not an aptitude test unless someone else has done research that shows us it's a predictor of the future.
Interesting.
And
So So you're thinking transfer of knowledge and skills for later use.
I don't think if you take a test on chapter 10 in abnormal psych and it was on schizophrenia and you're in abnormal psych and you get an A, I don't think that means anything for your future. I think that means you learned a lot and maybe you're enjoying the course and you scored really well. Maybe you're a good test taker. Maybe you have high test wiseness.
Right.
Maybe you looked around and you have great vision and you saw someone else's screen in the test center when you were the whole class was over there. It's hard to know what that score meant. Ideally, thinking positively, not too negatively, to me, a multiple choice exam on a content-based situation means it's a measure of what that person knows that day.
Yeah. And that's hard to get away from with most kinds of assessments unless you're doing an assessment that lasts over time, right?
Or an assessment that has been validated and that has predictive validity. We like to think that a driver's license test has been validated in such a way that a score of 40 and the vision test and the on-the-road driving test, that those three things combined are predictors of a safer driver than someone who hasn't passed those three criteria. That's what we like to think.
And we've talked before about the AP exams and the comparability studies the College Board does. That's the argument. They're making a predictive validity argument for AP exams.
Yeah. The hard part about that, and the people who do multiple regression research are now screaming at their Bluetooth speakers, is that we don't usually let drivers drive without a driver's license. So we don't look at the other end of the regression equation.
Right.
So
we basically have a selection bias.
We absolutely do. Yeah. So we don't study often enough students who don't go to college and what their psychological knowledge is. Students in high school who didn't take AP Psych and what their psychological knowledge is.
Yeah.
Regan and I dabbled in that with Eric Amsel a few years back and got into that and found that the gap isn't as much as we'd like, way more advantage. And we didn't include AP Psych. It'd be fun to go back and get into AP Psych with that. And my attitude about this is usually really unpopular because I get it. Multiple choice exams are necessary in some environments. I can't teach intro psych with 300 people and have them write 10-page elegant essays.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah. It's a sampling issue in a way. Given limitations of a certain situation, I can't gather everything that I would want to know in order to make an inference. So I've got to sample and gather part of what I want to know to make an inference. So, and I still see value in good multiple choice questions in measuring students' ability to distinguish between certain conclusions, but absolutely their value is very limited for measuring other kinds of things.
This is why I've always been intrigued, Rob, by that single diagnostic test item. Yeah. That's not based on multiple choice items in 60 minutes. That's based on a handful of items carefully crafted over time based on data that can really tell you what a student knows. If you want to know what a student knows on a single day, multiple choice test item is just fine. Absolutely. As long as it's carefully crafted and avoiding common errors that are readily available in the literature, double-barreled and one foil giving away something in the other foil and all that stuff. And there's all kinds of workshops.
And grammar mismatchy kind of things, stuff like that.
But in terms of an assessment and diagnostics, you've been on the forefront of this for a long time.
Well, and the single diagnostics are interesting. They're another protocol that I've heard that I learned about testing. I think this would be a construct validity test really for a multiple choice item is called a think aloud.
Sure.
We talked about that before.
I don't know if we've talked about it before, but I'm familiar with it.
But I think that's really interesting. So getting people to take multiple choice questions, but then whether or not they get the answer right or wrong, they show how they got to that right or wrong answer in another way, either orally or in writing. And then you check the match. And that's a good validity check for what your multiple choice question is actually measuring.
Yeah. I think there's some creative things that people are doing out there in pockets around the country, actually around the world. And whenever I have conversations with them, typically at teaching conferences, my first response is, so where are you going to publish this?
Yeah.
And the thing is, they're so busy doing the work that they rarely have a chance to write it up, even though
Absolutely.
it would be publishable. And so I think this is where we've got to get them on a podcast or writing a blog, or if they don't have time to write it up for a journal article, we've got to find an easier way for them to publicize their good work, because I think it's valuable, even if it's not formally written up for a journal article.
Totally agree. And this loops back to the beginning of our conversation. So as teachers, if we know what kind of thinking we want to measure, what resources are there for matching that kind of thinking with item types given our limitations? So if I've got 300 students and I want to measure this kind of thinking, should I do multiple choice, or is there something else that I should think about?
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to the beginning of our conversation as well. Oh, Rob, you're just keep going deep. You're thinking about, what kind of thinking do I want to measure? And I think for a lot of people, it's just about, what can I reasonably do in a 16-week semester? What's expected of my department? What are my departmental norms and expectations?
Yeah.
What can I
Absolutely. That's practical. Yeah.
Maybe I really would like to measure critical thinking. I would like to measure problem-solving skill. I would love to measure ethical thinking, but I'm teaching 2 sections of research methods with 35 each, and with 70 students, I don't know how to measure ethical thinking, and I got to get through a pandemic semester, so I'm just going to do what I've done. I mean, I hear you, and I respect and admire that, but at the same time, part of me is going, "Oh, Rob."
Well, I'll have a corresponding, but Eric.
Oh, that is very good. But Eric, or butthead Eric, but Eric. Yeah, awesome.
Totally hear the pragmatic concerns, and that's absolutely realistic, and I absolutely agree. But Eric, you make these decisions in your classroom, given all the practical concerns. You choose the assignments and the assessments that you do, given all those practical concerns, but you also choose the assessment formats in order to best get evidence underneath all the practical considerations of the student thinking that you want to measure, right?
Oh, Rob, the one thing I'll quibble with you about there is the word best.
Okay.
You think I'm making the best choices, and sometimes with 83 students in my capstone class this semester, I may not be making the best choices for the best measures. I'm making judicious choices to survive the semester as a department chair, who also has another class he's teaching in the same semester with 165 students in an online 2-credit course.
Agreed. Yes, but Eric, you are making the best choices within those boundaries. So given current considerations.
I think the word best is a trap word.
Okay. All right. I can buy that. Okay. I'll let it go too.
No, I'm not trying to shut you down. I think, and I had this conversation, I think with a student, I think we do trap ourselves with the word best a lot.
Yeah, I bet you're right. Yeah, I don't like the term best practices anymore, so I agree with you. There should be better terms.
Well, best practices is one of the things I'm okay with. But I think when students say, I'm trying to think about the best career for me as I graduate, I think they trap themselves.
Yeah.
Or I want to marry the best person I can find.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to wait for the best job after I get my bachelor's degree.
That's a good point.
I have so many conversations with advisees and mentees about best, and they just pile this anxiety and this pressure on themselves with best. And I wish they could settle more for satisficing what's good enough for now,
right?
As opposed to, I've got to hold out because is this best? And they drive themselves crazy. An analogy that I use frequently is, we all want to peek at the end of the book and see what the outcome is. Oh, do I get a divorce, or do I stay in this marriage? Do I get remarried after my divorce, or am I gun shy? Is this relationship going to work? Buy this car, or am I going to have buyer's remorse? Is it going to turn out in the end? Did I make the best decision, or should I wait? Should I take this graduate school offer or that graduate school offer? And I think as humans, we drive ourselves crazy. And I think students now in 2021, for whatever reason, have that extra hard.
I bet you're right, and there's a teacher side of that too.
Yes.
We have to make so many
Yes.
decisions if we're what is it? It's satisficers and optimizers? Is that the other
I think that's about right. Yeah.
Teachers can definitely trap themselves in that optimizing language too. What's the best way to teach this? And I'm going to perseverate and spin until I determine the best way to teach this.
Right.
When there's 20 different great ways, you choose one and you go.
Right. And you might have in your school next door in the classroom next to you, someone else teaching advanced research methods with 4 other students.
Yep.
And they might choose approach that's antithetical to yours and achieve delightful outcomes. And those students might have just as good an experience as yours are going to have with you. And you scratch your head and you go, holy cow, how did that happen? And that's just because there's so many variables involved in teaching success that it can happen.
Yeah.
There's not one way.
Now I'm curious about satisficing and optimizing research within the context of teaching and learning. Wow.
Oh, Rob.
Oh, but Eric.
You are such a you have such a curious mind. You are in the exact right profession, my friend.
Oh, right back at you.
I hope you didn't mind it is an homage to Laura Petrie and Mary Tyler Moore. The first time I said it, I stumbled on it. The next 14 times I said it, I enjoyed it thoroughly.
I think it's great. And we didn't think of it till now, but Oh Rob and But Eric would have been another great alternate title for the podcast.
I think it could become the subtitle.
I think you're right.
And by the way, I'm going to spell But Eric with 2 T's.
Oh, damn it. I'm sorry that you have control over this.
No, that's cool. I think it's perfectly appropriate, buddy.
This is fun.
All right. Thank you for the time, as always.
Thanks. This was swell. Thanks.